Hello. It's episode 160 of Grow Yourself Up. And it's early February in 2026. And it's going to be half term, so midterm break in the UK around about mid-February, 13th or 14th of February. And I want to take this opportunity to talk about sovereignty. So your own sovereignty in your own life and how you run your life, settling into that and how it links to secure attachment and tending to yourself, and really having the courage to live your life according to how it works for you. So this is a huge, huge thing for trauma survivors, those of us who haven't had our needs met in childhood when we've had traumatic stress, those of us who are healing from developmental trauma, because we have been, many of us, the classic thing with developmental trauma that Stephen Terrell always talks about is how the last thing to be healed with developmental trauma is that massive rupture with self. And how that often plays out is that we are very, very, this always plays out like this, basically, that we're very externally focused and we constantly seek external validation in all the ways possible. So that might mean that you need to be the cleverest person there. You need to be the most perfect. You need to be the most shiny. You need to try and get the biggest car or the biggest house or the highest salary or have the best-selling music or whatever it is in your own kind of realm of stuff. And it means that you look to other people to discover, am I okay? Am I doing this life thing right? Is this good enough? And it keeps us really, really trapped in cycles of taking on more work, pushing our children to do things that we think are necessary. For example, it might be that you think, right, they need to become a doctor or they need to become some sort of profession. And in order to do that, they need to go to this university. And in order to get to that university, they need to start out in this nursery. And it's not, this is not, this might sound bizarre to some of you, but like in London, there are nurseries where people compete to get into, like preschools, because they think that they're going to have a better chance of going to either Oxford or Cambridge. And so you can really see that there's so much external focus there on this actual child, even before it's, 3. And for those parents, that's a sort of a narcissistic profile in some ways, because if you're using your child to gratify your own needs, that's not about them. That's about something about you. But there's so much of, we can be okay if this child has this path. And really, we're trying, the place of freedom we're trying to get to is we can be okay anyway, even if we don't take that path. And actually, the most important thing is our own approval of ourselves. Are we comfortable with our actions? Are we comfortable with our life? Are we happy in our life? Does it make us feel good on a daily basis? Do we have joy? Do we have love? Do we have contentment? Do we have a sense of connection with people? But first of all, many of us have learned, when you're raised in a household, when you're emotionally neglected and you have had no tending to yourself or insufficient attunement for you to learn about your actual embodied experience, you becoming disembodied or being disembodied is the outcome, because no one has helped you to tune into what's going on in your body. No one's tuned into, how do I listen to that? You may have been actively punished for tuning into your body, for crying too much, for being too much, too emotive, whatever was not acceptable in your family. And so listening to yourself is like probably the last thing you think you want to do. And I mean, I think back to a lot of the choices I've made at university. I decided I needed to do something clever. The university I went to in South Africa, there's an East Campus and a West Campus. And West Campus, I went to Wits in Johannesburg, and the West Campus is much more like business and accounts and things. And I was like, I did a mainly an arts degree. Well, I did economics and art history, but I wanted to be on the West Campus because I thought that was important, because I needed to demonstrate cleverness. And I have often wondered if I didn't study more psychology or something first time round, because I didn't have kind of the courage to in some ways. Because I was, very outwardly focused on what other people deem to be important. And this is really, really important in holiday times, in times when we get to spend concentrated periods with our children, because that has the potential to be a period of so much joy. And often it can feel that it goes really badly wrong. People find it really overwhelming. There's often a lot of setting ourselves up for failure or for dashed expectations, because we actually take on way too much and we expect way too much of our children and way too much of ourselves, as if we're going to somehow magically become different people on this fantasy half term. And so I want to talk to you today about really settling into noticing what works for you, what works for your family, and claiming that sovereignty unapologetically so that you can live your own beautiful life. Because we want to deepen into what makes our own hearts sing. Because if our hearts are singing, we're collectively supporting collective consciousness and the collective nervous system with, more of us singing and bringing more joy to the world. And it only takes, I can't remember the statistics, but I keep on hearing on podcasts with either Pam Gregory or Heather Ainsworth, who are two wonderful astrologers, hearing about what number of people we need to have kind of being woken up and operating from places of love, compassion, contentment, joy, enthusiasm. And if we're constantly outsourcing our power and choosing things that don't work for us in our lives, we're not going to be coming from those emotions. Now, I'm really conscious I am talking about joy, love, contentment, gratitude, compassion, allowing yourself to enjoy yourself and cultivate joy. And that can feel uncomfortable and difficult, and maybe you're not allowed in the current world context. Everything is kind of burning. There's just so much war, so much violence. And it can feel, I know people I know expressed that it's hard to cultivate joy at this time. And I want to say to you that when we consider the collective consciousness and the collective nervous system, so I live in safety in the UK, and I consider it really important that I inject kind of good energy, love, compassion, joy, gratitude, contentment, enthusiasm, all these things into the collective consciousness and into the collective nervous system, so that we can try and shift the world state. Because sitting in where I live in Southwest London, I don't have the power to change the trajectory of world events with force or with any of the tools that I have in my life. I don't have a flight of ships or something. I can't stop what's going on in multiple different countries, but I can contribute to shifting the energy of the world. And I want you to just consider this very simple example. I talked about something similar to this recently on social media, but if you get onto a bus, say you're catching a bus, and the bus driver is really cheerful with you and says hi and smiles at you and looks at you in the eye, and you have a little friendly interaction, what do you notice about how you feel after that? I bet you are then much friendlier to people. You might smile at other people. You have a much more of a spring in your step than you would have if, imagine this other scenario, you got on the bus and the bus driver didn't look at you or make any eye contact, and you just paid or tapped your card or however you pay. And then you went and walked down the bus or whatever, and before you'd even left, they were driving really in a jolting way, and you lost your footing and you dropped your bag or you fell or something. It would be hard not to think, oh, they're an arsehole. They were driving in a jolting way and, kind of getting more grumpy. Or maybe it's just me who would think that. But, when you have interactions which kind of rub you up the wrong way, or in nervous system language, send danger signals to you, that makes us send out more danger signals. And we have to be really careful then of what's going on in our own system and what state we are in our system, and therefore what we are sending out into the world. And we are that in a really big scale. Obviously, everyone is living their own lives. But with that type of scenario playing on all the time of what what state are people kind of transmitting from themselves, from a nervous system state, and how is that shifting that of the states of people around us. If I come home and my husband is here and he's very, very cheerful, my children are very joyful and really excited to see me, that will impact my state. And so I really want to use my energy to help shift the collective. I really like Lynn McTaggart's work on this. You can look her up, Lynn McTaggart. She talks about doing meditations for conflict zones. So that's some of her body of work. Anyway, but so I kind of want you to give yourself permission. We can't drown ourselves in suffering. That is not going to shift our world, essentially. So you can take whatever brave action you can take in your community, in wider communities, in communities across the world. And it's really, really important that you come back to noticing your own community, like your literal self and your children and your family and your community just around you. So please give yourself permission to continue to cultivate joy, to resource yourself, to focus on that precious life you have. Okay, so I really want you to think about what often happens is that, particularly if we're a recovering perfectionist and we think things need to look a certain way and we want to control things, we design times, or we imagine how times are going to be, and we often tend to overbook, we overcomplicate, and we believe, even if it's unconsciously, that we need to be some sort of magic fairy all of the time, creating these experiences that others deem valid. So that maybe society deems valid, or maybe that in your family it's deemed valid. Or, like, for example, you might find yourself booking a skiing trip, but actually your whole family hates skiing, but in your family of origin perhaps, or in your social group, skiing is deemed as being like an important thing. I don't know. Or whatever. I mean, it could be anything. It could be like going to all the theme parks or something is deemed important in your kind of group of people. Or going to lots of art galleries, or I don't know, dirt biking, whatever your interests are. But I want you to kind of really ponder, if you weren't trying to impress anyone, what would you do? If you weren't imagining that there's going to be some sort of committee marking how you parent or how you spend your time, what would you do? How would you actually have joy with yourself and your children? And another question to ponder, so I'll put an I, if I wasn't trying to craft a fantasy based on what other people think is a good idea, what would I actually do? So let me give you an example. If you have these ideas of, we're going to do a lot of trips, say we're going to go into central London and we're going to go and look at like the Science Museum and the Natural History Museum. Honestly, I would never venture to do that by myself, even though my kids are nearly 10, because I would find that really overstimulating, trying to, I would find that overstimulating because I'd be wondering about where all the bathrooms are on the way. Are there going to be lots of crowds? Will we manage on the train and the tube? Yes, we will manage on the train and the tube, but for that type of outing, I prefer to go with my husband. And so I wouldn't plan to do something like that by myself in half term. I would not want to be with a lot of crowds. I would prefer to go somewhere where there's a lot of nature and where I can pack a picnic and have things that resource me as well when my daughters enjoy themselves. So I would actively avoid doing things that are deemed, I don't know, worthwhile, or where there's going to be lots of other people. And so I want you to really notice, does it feel important? Like, do you think, like in my family, it was important to go to museums and also specifically art galleries. So I always think it demonstrates, it's virtuous to do that sort of thing, and that it somehow also, again, demonstrates cleverness or some sort of intellectual signaling. And I invite you to step away from anything like that. You do not need to do any intellectual signaling. You do not need to prove that you're a good parent, in inverted commas, by taking your kids to art galleries and probably dragging them around. And you're allowed to focus on things that have ease and have joy and that you enjoy. Because your joy matters. And especially if you've grown up in a family where there's been emotional neglect, you will have learned to omit yourself. So taking yourself into account may be extremely, extremely unfamiliar to you. So I really, in this case, want you to center your experience. So if I give you an example around this, I love being in nature and outside, and I can get the light in my eyes. I can even maybe take off my shoes and ground. And I like to have easy access to bathrooms because my twins seem to need to go to the loo quite a lot. And then if I'm constantly running like far away to the loo, it just makes it a bit of a pain, especially if I'm not with a friend or have gone with someone else. And I like things that are pretty, like beautiful locations, like beautiful parks or like botanical gardens or something like Kew Gardens or Wisley or Bushy Park that are various different places near where I live, and or kind of in London somewhere. And I like to be able to take food that I know my children will eat. I like to make my own flask of tea. I'm very fussy about the way I make tea. And all of those things resource me. That makes it enjoyable for me. And so I really think about what will be enjoyable for me. How can both my girls and I have a nice time? How can we enjoy being together? Because if I took them to something that they really didn't like, that I did like, I don't know what that would be. But if I took them somewhere where I thought they needed to behave a certain way and get something from it that would then gratify me, then I've got expectations on their behavior, and I'm not allowing them to be free. And if I went and sat in a soft play the whole holiday, which I really find a lot, then that wouldn't cater to my needs much. So yes, I might go to a soft play at some point, or like a big play center or something for fun, or if it's raining a lot, or a trampoline park. But there's also allowed to be time for me. And so really think about, step away from thinking about this is going to be a fantastic holiday where we do lots of baking and crafting and, we spend a long time crafting. They manage to do all these tasks all by themselves or something. Like when crafting goes successfully in our house, it's normally because my children are coloring or they have created their own crafting, not when I have tried to engineer something. Mine love painting. They love like painting with their hands still. So, I mean, obviously that makes massive, and we have to wash their hands for about 5 hours afterwards. But, it's often the things that are the simplest things that bring the most joy. And like if we bake together, if I have a fantasy that we're going to bake a chocolate cake together, it's not going to be a good cake that we can eat. I mean, it's not going to be a really nice tasting cake. When we bake together, the best thing that I can actually do is to let them each have their own bowl and to make a very simple cake mixture with hand beating and let them each break their eggs or break an egg or have some flour and do that. And then the joy is in the process of making it. They never really want to eat the cake anyway. They're only interested in the icing. And I generally make the icing anyway. So, but if I try and keep tight control over the process and I want to use a blender, there's so much more fighting. And we kind of all get on top of each other. So what we do well together is we work well if we're making a soup together and everyone gets to cut up like easy vegetables like courgettes or something that's not too hard. And that seems to work well and that creates joy. And then they help me with various elements of something if I'm cooking. But if I've set out with this thing of we're going to make these fantastic, type of biscuits and everything, because it's their twins, but they each want to do exactly the same thing. And so then if there's, then we have a fight about each task, about who's going to do each task. And that just becomes really like dull, basically. So I say this in many different ways, in many different episodes, but you matter. And society is going to give you the message constantly that you need to be a certain way to be acceptable, that you need to sacrifice yourself to be acceptable as a mother, that you need to be perfect, and that you need to not complain. And I am saying none of that is true. You don't need to sacrifice yourself. Please don't be a martyr. You cannot get things perfect, and you really matter. And in order to, if you really are wanting to focus on changing things in your family and breaking cycles, really centering your own experience is really, really important. Your humanity matters. You are a human. You are not a machine. You may have learned in childhood that you need to be a machine and that you need to get everything perfect and right, and that you don't matter, that you're a vehicle for everyone else in your family and maybe wider than your family, but you do matter. And please act like that. Please take yourself into account. Please don't live your life as if it's a fantasy that someone else is going to mark you on at the end, because they're not going to mark you on it. And you really have to start living now as if you matter now. So ask yourself those questions. If I wasn't trying to impress anyone, what would we do? And if I wasn't trying to craft a fantasy based on what other people think is a good idea, what would I let us do? It might be that you just love going to your local park and that's all you do. And that's perfectly fine. Sometimes that's all that we do. I might plan one outing for my girls, like a sort of, I don't know, something. And I said we can go for lunch somewhere on one day, but you don't have to be some sort of all singing, all dancing machine. We have to step away from that and step back into what really works in our individual families and own that. And the sovereignty here is that you then are really being in your own adult self. And from a secure attachment point of view, you're really allowing the voices of all those different parts of you to guide what you do, and to be from an internal point of view and a relationship with all of those parts. You're tending to yourself. You're acting like you matter. You're acting like all your parts matter. And that's part of creating this own secure attachment, is that we stop outsourcing our value externally. I want to say something about sovereignty and secure attachment. So ideally, in childhood, our parents love us unconditionally. And what that means is that they love us regardless of our behavior, and that we can actually feel that. So someone saying to you, I love you, I love you, I love you, doesn't mean that you will actually feel loved or seen or received or supported. And love is really an action verb, particularly for parents. And ideally, our children have a felt sense that we really love them. They feel supported. They feel seen. They feel acknowledged. They feel supported and held in some of their worst, shouty behavior when they're little. And they really have that deep sense of safety, which comes from unconditional love. Now, many of us did not have that unconditional love. You have, if you're a parentified child, if you grew up in a narcissistic family scenario, if there was abuse of any kind, emotional neglect, all of that, one of the core coping strategies we develop is to perform. So we people please, we care for our parents, we try and get things perfect, we try and keep things under control. And what's actually underlying that is that love is conditional. I'm only lovable when I am doing something to help you, when I'm providing value, when I'm tending to my siblings, when I'm not having too big of feelings, when I'm managing your overwhelming feelings, i.e. the child is managing the adult's overwhelming feelings. Because, in families where there's emotional neglect, it's not that the adults don't have feelings. These children are left to manage the overwhelming emotion that comes from the adults, and the children get no support in their own emotions. And that happens in narcissistic families, and often when there's addiction. And so what we're trying to do as part of this crafting of secure attachment with ourselves is love ourselves unconditionally. Now, that may be extremely unfamiliar to you because you've learned that love is conditional. You've learned you are only worthy when you are doing something that adds value, providing, whatever it is that you needed to provide in your family of origin. So now this is a massive kind of shift where all of your parts are valuable and lovable. And this can be, if you have decided in this midterm break, this half term, I need to be this type of mother, I need to do this many outings, we need to be crafting all the time or doing cooking or baking, or you've created some other fantasy of how you're going to be, then you may notice that you kind of withdraw love for yourself or kind of go into this place of being like, oh, you were really rubbish. They couldn't do crafting, or they couldn't cook, or I went into a rage at some point during the day because I was upset about something. And then you will, if you don't catch yourself, you might really be critical of how you are and not be able to be compassionate to yourself. And I want to say, no, that's not what we're aiming for. You are allowed to have limitations. You're allowed to do no cooking, no crafting, no baking. You don't have to do any outings. Part of sovereignty for yourself is discovering what works for you, what works for your family. Your family might be a family who need to stay at home and, I don't know, watch TV all day, or just dip your feet onto the grass for a few bits of fresh air and lie on your sofa all day, or read books in different rooms. You are the one who has to kind of figure that out in your family. What helps you stay regulated? What helps you stay connected? What helps you have beautiful times together? And to not constantly gaslight yourself, because one of the big legacies of not having our needs met is that we going back to that thing about the external locus of control, we constantly feel like we need to have our reality validated by someone else, which is why it sometimes feels appealing, like to think, oh, I'm going to go, if I do like an outing to a theme park and then an outing to a museum and then an outing to, I don't know, some faraway park. That is what society tells me makes a good half term for my children. And if you don't deconstruct that, you might just download that wholesale from like the societal mainframe and then try and impose that on your family. And then when all goes to hell in a handbasket, then find yourself being very critical of both yourself and your children and everything just being shit. And I want to invite you, push back that societal mainframe messaging. Try not to self-gaslight, which is very hard initially when you're trying to establish your own sovereignty in your own, and like develop that self-trust about like, I know what's best for us. I know how we get on best together. I know what a good half term looks like. And that might not involve any other people. It might not involve any outings. So, and the unconditional love bit there is to really allow that and to know you're lovable. You're lovable regardless of what sort of half term you're having. You're lovable. You don't have to perform for that. This is not performative parenting is really keeps us trapped. And it's really for no one else's benefit. It's funny because, there's that idea, like I've had this sometimes when I've been at the park and I want to demonstrate what I think other people are imagining is good parenting. And there's just no point. There's no point because I've never, no one is really going to come over and say to you, oh, well done. I thought that was a good thing that you did, And so these are all our own fantasies, which we project onto people. So I'm really trying to help you. I want you to invite yourself into a place of a bit more freedom, of really validating yourself. Even if something goes like really badly wrong and you really lose it, or you get super cross, or you don't enjoy the half term, you're still worthy of love. We want to unconditionally love all of our parts. Okay. I just really hope that you can extend that unconditional love to yourself. Try and not gaslight yourself. Try and build self-trust and like really feel into your own knowledge about what works and let that be your guide. I hope that makes sense.